Okay, cool. People are coming in. Cool. Hey, everybody. Welcome to our first webinar of 2023. Really excited to have Jeremy Moser from USERP here. Jeremy, I'll let you do your own intro here so I don't butcher it.
Cool,
But
cool.
if I'll just do a couple of quick housekeeping things. We want questions. We would love to hear your questions. So please feel free to use the chat to drop questions. Um, I will, if there's any that are particularly contextual or relate to a specific slide, I'll do my best to queue those up as we're going through. Otherwise, we'll save them for the end. If you notice any audio or video issues on my side, just drop a note in the chat. We'll get that stuff fixed up as quickly as possible. And then I'm going to wait for a message from Sierra that says we're good to go and sound good and look good. And then let's dive in. Okay, Sierra says all good. All right, cool. Jeremy, I will hand it over to you. Would you mind, telling us a little bit about yourself, about USERP, and then we can dive into today's topic, which is link building and specifically how to scale it, which personally I'm very curious to learn about because link building is hard enough even at a small scale.
For sure. Awesome. Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's good to be here, and thanks everyone for tuning in. I'm Jeremy Moser. I'm CEO at USERP. We're a SEO firm that serves mostly SaaS companies as a whole. So venture-backed startups tends to be our main ICP. We've been around for close to 4 years now, I think, and the team is about 45 plus or so at the moment, and growing pretty steadily in the new year. So doing some cool work with cool companies like Monday.com, Freshworks, ActiveCampaign, some other high-profile SaaS companies, and all that sort of good stuff.
Awesome. I'm just dropping links in the chat right now to your LinkedIn, Jeremy, and to the USERP site so people can go check all that out.
Awesome.
And do you live in Hawaii? Kind of a side
I do,
note,
yeah.
Yeah, that's pretty cool.
Yeah, my wife and I, we moved here around like 6 months ago, mostly just for short term. We're actually going back to San Francisco, which is where I'm from, at the end of the month. So we'll be back in the lower 48 soon.
Cool. Awesome.
Back
That's
to the
great.
Cold of San Francisco.
Yeah. It's 2 degrees here this morning. So
Okay,
Hawaii
so not
sounds
a,
pretty
yeah,
nice.
for sure. Yeah, I think it's 80 here and sunny like most days.
That's awesome. I would be curious, use the chat, folks. Tell us where you're from, like where are people calling in from, and tell us the temperature. I would be curious if it's colder anywhere else than it is here right now. Cool. All right. If you're good, Jeremy, let's dive in. There will be a button at the bottom of your screen that says present to audience, and that should help you queue up slides.
Perfect.
Cool.
Cool.
Yeah, we can see that.
Let me know if we're all good there. Yeah, it looks good.
Yeah, all good.
Cool. Yeah. So today we're going to chat a little bit about how to scale link building. So talking about some real world examples, real world strategy, how you can kind of implement this in your own business, or if you're working in-house at a company, how you can kind of position this, how you can leverage this to tie into the rest of your marketing mix there, boost a little bit of your SEO strategy as a whole. So a little bit of intro. We already did some intros there, but hi, I'm Jeremy Moser, co-founder and CEO of USERP. We're an SEO growth firm for SaaS and some e-com companies as well, from funded seed stage to enterprise. So we work with some pretty cool brands, like I mentioned, Monday.com, Freshworks, ActiveCampaign, Fivetran, a bunch more, and we're a team of a lot of SEO nerds. So there's some other cool dorky stuff there at the bottom. I own Wordable, which is a tool that exports your content from Google Docs to your CMS, while doing like cleaning code, compressing images, all that kind of stuff. So it's a tool we acquired maybe like 2 years ago or something like that. Just good fit for kind of the stuff we do, and helps you publish a lot of content at scale without doing all that tedious stuff of, putting it in the back end, editing in your CMS, all that kind of fun stuff.
That's awesome. What a great workflow hack. Does it work with other CMS? I think it used to be WordPress. Is it still WordPress? Have you added others?
Yeah, so it's WordPress mostly, and then we are adding other ones. So we do connect with like HubSpot and Medium at the moment, and then we're working on a few other ones. But WordPress does seem to be still like kind of the main market there. I think most CMSs are still on WordPress. We've considered other ones like Webflow, but not just yet. So if you're on Webflow or anything like that, stay tuned. Hopefully we'll have that soon for you.
Okay, cool. Yeah, that's what I was hoping you would say.
For sure. Yeah, Webflow, we use it for a few different things. So it's a good CMS too. But anyways, agenda for today, what we're learning about link building strategy is we'll start by just kind of diving into some of the refreshing stuff around like why link building, why is it important from an SEO perspective, especially in sort of today's climate in SEO. What's a good backlink and how do you sort of measure that objectively? and then diving into some of the results first. So how we, ended up getting a few hundred unique domains to one page. We have a few other ones in there that we can share where, again, each one of those has a few hundred unique domains pointing to those two. And then we'll dive into the detailed campaign walkthrough, sort of breaking down all those steps that we do, what you can expect from even like a cost standpoint. So breaking everything down pretty clear for you. If you're to take this internally or you want to do it for your own company, you'll have sort of all those tools at your disposal to really understand how to execute on it. And then the last bit will be a few more link strategies beyond sort of this traditional campaign one that we ran that can scale pretty well, and sort of how you can take advantage of some of those.
Cool. Looking forward to it.
Sweet. Yeah. So we'll just dive into some like kind of like the refresh stuff, especially, with the latest few updates from Google's end around like helpful content updates, link spam updates. There's a lot of questions in the air of like what actually is good SEO these days. And still, we like to break it down into essentially 3 unique buckets. So number one being technical SEO, like what's your site structure? Can search engines actually read the content on your page? Can they index it? Is your site fast? All these kind of things are like foundational elements of SEO that are really key in terms of just ensuring that, like, if you're doing content and links and your technical SEO is not up to speed or up to par, it's just not going to work as well. You're not going to rank well. You're not going to see good results. And so all these things are essentially like key pieces of a puzzle, and you're not really complete without any of them. Links are one where if you're in a really kind of gray area niche or like a small niche that's not competitive yet, links are probably less of a focus for you. If you're in a niche that's more competitive, something where competitors are big, the content has a lot of potential value there, that's where links are sort of a bigger piece of the puzzle. But again, it sort of differs depending on what niche you're in. So we like to look at links as essentially a third of the puzzle in SEO. And so why link building? Why is it important still? Why do we think it's actually going to be more important? Well, a lot of it is boiling down lately to, like I mentioned, some of those updates from Google's end around, especially helpful content update. Earlier, as we've seen, like ChatGPT, all these things around AI have been cropping up in the last few years. And Google's original stance there was that they were not cool with AI. They didn't want to showcase any sort of AI content on search results. That stance has recently changed to where they've said that now they're actually okay with AI content as long as it's helpful for users, it's genuinely a good piece of content, etc. And so I think we're only going to start to see more AI content crop up over time, and we're really already seeing this at play with some major sites. So Bankrate.com, they're probably one of the largest finance sites in the game, so comparative to NerdWallet in terms of size, revenue, all that kind of stuff. And so if you just take a look with a few search operators, you can see that they're already publishing, kind of a mass amount of AI-driven content. So this is around, so far, 173 pages that you can find publicly that are, that say essentially this article was generated by using automation technology and fact-checked by an editor. So we can already see that, Google is okay with AI content at some scale as long as it's actually helpful. And so that means content is becoming a little bit more commoditized in the sense that it's a little harder to tell, right, what is a genuinely good piece of content. And so that's something that link building is really here to answer, in that, a lot of folks will give the advice in SEO of just publish better content, right? You've probably heard this. I've heard this countless times of, okay, if you want to rank, you just have to publish the best piece of content. But content quality really just isn't on page, right? It's multiple other factors, and Google actually lists this in what they call how search works. So they're kind of like documentation on what they're actually looking for, how people browse the web, and how those two sort of areas intersect. And what they say there is, for example, one of several factors we use to help determine this being content quality, is understanding if other prominent websites link or refer to the content. This has been, this often proven to be a good sign that the information is well trusted. And so this gives you an idea of, this is published directly on Google's documentation. This is a core part of the algorithm of how search works, in that links are just a really great way to be more objective. So saying that something is like a really good article is a good subjective measure, but it's really dependent on like the niche that you're serving, the type of query that someone's searching for. There's so many different factors at play here. There's some okay objective measures like time on page, but again, that sort of depends on things like how long is your blog post, is there depth needed here or not, or did someone just leave the page open for a while they were doing something else? There's a lot of things that get convoluted with those metrics. And so links tend to be a really good measure of objective strength, quality, authority, where you can actually tangentially measure some of this, right? So if you're looking at the screenshot here under objective section, this is just a screenshot of NerdWallet's sort of link profile. Gives you an idea of 6.4 million backlinks, 141,000 unique websites linking back to them. It just gives you a good idea of, if this many people are talking in a positive manner about the content that NerdWallet has to offer, it's probably a really good article and one that people are finding useful, and that gives it a little bit of a boost in the algorithm, so to speak. And so that's what links are doing here is because they're so difficult to get, that's really one of the reasons why they're so important, right? Like if content becomes a little more commoditized in the sense that it's easier to pump it out at scale with the assistance of AI, and then maybe you've got a good subject matter expert in there, kind of making sure everything looks good and the AI is not, talking about some nonsense or anything like that. The links can really be an objective measure there. They're super difficult to get, which is why they're valuable in the first place, right? So if you can get a link from a place like NerdWallet or an authoritative site, it doesn't really link out to that many people as a whole, but everyone links to them. That's a really good sign that they're saying, okay, cool, your article on this subject, that's really good. We're linking to that so that our users can read that. So that's really the sole purpose of links in that sense. And there's some really good benefits of getting those links. And so you can really think of them as essentially like a proxy for authority, trust, awareness, all these kinds of things. And this is a really nice, interesting conversation that Marie Haynes, she's a great SEO, been around the game for a long time. She asked Gary, a person who works at Google, about EAT. And so EAT, it's now EEAT since this tweet was released. So that essentially stands for experience, expertise, authoritativeness, and trustworthiness. So these are essentially like ways that Google formulates what is a good article to rank based on some of these objective measures here. And so in this interview with Marie Haynes and Gary from Google, what he said was essentially it's largely based on links and mentions on authoritative sites. If the Washington Post mentions you, that's good. There's also some information in QRG, which is Quality Raters Guidelines. Super nerdy stuff. I don't expect you to go reading it, but it's a huge documentation that it is a good background to know of if you're really diving into the weeds of SEO and want to see how really different factors work. The Quality Raters Guidelines is a cool document where you can really just see essentially what is Google looking for, how do they think that people browse the internet in the modern day, and how those two kind of factors correlate and how you can create better content that fits that. And so those are guidelines I'd recommend checking out. But essentially what we're looking at here from a link perspective is that the build it and they will come era of like you've seen this in even startup spaces too as just a general whole, right? You can't really expect to just build things and then have them take off or go viral. There needs to be some sort of focused effort on distribution, promotion, building the brand. And really what links are is essentially just a proxy for brand awareness. And so that mantra of like, just publish a great piece and like people will discover it and they'll naturally just link to it in droves and you'll outrank, your biggest competitors super easily. It's just not really the case anymore. There's so many folks vying for those coveted, first 5 spots on search results that great content is really just table stakes and there needs to be some sort of major effort made on promotion. And so just to recap some of this, we like to think of links as like Yelp reviews, and that like positive mentions from credible sources is really just a powerful signal that your content is respected, it's authoritative, and it's given niche. It's a good signal, and a lot of algorithms actually work this way, right? Like more reviews, higher quality reviews, more accurate reviews, trusted ones, verified reviews. All these things matter in terms of like even localized rankings or stuff on search engines like Yelp, etc. So they're pretty similar in how those algorithms work, and it's just something to take into account that that's sort of how links play into some of this that we're chatting about. And then this portion here is really just about setting some context and foundation for some of the campaign stuff that we'll dive into, right? Of just understanding what is a good backlink, what can you actually benchmark from, what do you look for, and how do you determine like, is this site worthwhile, is it not? How do we know if our campaigns are succeeding or not? These are some things that you can kind of look for and really telltale signs that you're earning sort of the right links that Google actually considers valuable and counts, versus maybe really low quality sites where you get a lot of them on a monthly basis, but they're not actually moving the needle there. They're not actually producing results for you. So these are some of the main like 5 key factors. There's definitely more depending on how nerdy and specific you want to get. These are a good baseline to kind of reference from. So number 1 being a high authority site. What we mean by that is typically a benchmark based on a few different scores here, like a DR, DA, authority score. These are not foolproof in the sense that like a DR 70 is a must or anything like that. They're just a good benchmark and sort of a tripwire metric that tends to lead to most other things. There are ways to game it, so for sure don't take this one in a silo or anything like that. But it's usually a good authority. Those authority scores are usually a good metric for kind of brand and trust as a whole. Then you want to look at things like the traffic of the site. Do they get organic traffic? Do they have direct or branded search? Are really cool things to look at. So if a site is getting a ton of branded search per month, usually a good sign that they're well respected, well known in that space. That's a really good site to get a link from. One that's a brand that's been around for a long time. It's going to be around for a long time. It's not just some sort of like content site that was spun up for the sake of kind of creating random content or getting links or anything like that. And then a few other things you want to look at there, like contextual. So are you getting a link that is within the article or the body of an article? Are you getting that link mentioned in a relevant piece of content? We want to avoid anything around like directories, profile links, things like that. These tend to just be discounted immediately and not counted by Google in terms of like a good link. As just, if anyone, again, the whole point of links is that they're really hard to get, right? The good, valuable ones. So if you can just go, if anyone can go set up a profile, add their link to that, and then get a really good link, then that link just doesn't really matter all that much, right? The whole point of links is that they're hard to get, so when you do get them, they are really valuable. And so that's sort of the things we want to look for here when we're talking about what is a good link, is that sort of commonality mix between high authority, traffic, context, relevance, and then we typically want to ensure that most of the links we're getting are not containing anything like a no follow or sponsored tag. It's just going to be a natural part of it for no follow tags, and Google has kind of backtracked their stance on no follow a little bit. It's still kind of a gray area, but the best links tend to not contain those tags. So it's just something to keep in mind when you're looking here, but I wouldn't discount anything that does contain a no follow tag, because it can still be very useful.
Can I interrupt you with a quick question, Jeremy?
Yeah, absolutely.
Chase asked a question related to the previous slide, which I think is a good one. It says, would you say one high authority site backlink outweighs, say, 20 low authority site links? So just trying to understand the value of the work we put into a high quality backlink. I think the question is like, if the 70 or 80 kind of domain rating link is worth however many hours or weeks or whatever amount of time that would go into earning that.
Yeah, it's a really good question, and absolutely, especially when we're talking about like the latest updates we've seen from link spam. Essentially, a lot of those links that were lower quality before that may have kind of slipped through the radar, been under detection, things like that, were propagating up rankings. But we saw a ton of sites, and it was in December, this update. Essentially, what we saw was that a lot of these links started to not count towards essentially your ranking in the algorithm, right? And so we saw a ton of sites dip off, mostly that had a really kind of mediocre, poor quality link profile, where a lot of those links stacked up were, they had a ton total amount of links, but the average quality of a given link was just not very high. And so we're for sure seeing this even more. We used to see, maybe a year or two ago, this wouldn't have been as much of the case. It's still been trending in that direction of quality over quantity. But the short answer is that yes, absolutely. What we're seeing now is that, you can't just kind of get away with any mediocre link here. What we really see is that one super high quality link, whether that's a high DR with high traffic, it's contextual, it's relevant, sort of all these factors listed here are for sure way more worthwhile than kind of saying, let's try to stack up 50, 60, 100 of these like mediocre ones in a month. As really, you're getting on a site that's branded, one that has actual authority in the space, and you can potentially even drive direct traffic from those two, which we can kind of jump into in a little bit here as well. So for sure, I'd say it's more than worth the effort, especially just as the way things are trending. So if you're playing a long game here of like, I'm in this, I'm in SEO for the next 5-10 years, I want the site to be around, for sure, I'd spend 99% of your link building effort on that.
Awesome, great answer, thank you.
So this is a good example just to preface and kind of cover some of those 5 factors we just went into of what is a good backlink overall. It's sometimes hard to understand just looking at a link, like, is this going to be valuable to us in this way or is it not? Just by judging off the sites, you can kind of get a little bit of a glimpse of that, but you also want to look into those other factors like I mentioned. And so this is an example of a great backlink for Todoist. So it's a niche relevant mention from a high authority site. I believe this is Zapier that mentioned them. And this is one that has the ability to drive significant traffic. And so that's where that dual kind of purpose of links comes into play, is that number one, first and foremost, they are sort of algorithmic in that sense, right? Where you want to drive them to your site or specific pages on your site so that you can increase those rankings. But the second tier benefit there tends to be that you can actually drive really strong referral direct traffic from given sites. So this article by Zapier, gets thousands of hits per month, right? And so being listed on here. You get that link, obviously, but you're also getting essentially direct advertising in front of people that are doing high intent searches. There's a little less bias there in that, like, you're not writing your own article saying you're the best to-do list app, right? So there's a little bit of a workaround there. So this would be one that I would consider to be a really fantastic link for Todoist. Ones that you really want to strive for. These are probably the cream of the crop ones. You're not always going to get these, but this is just a great example all around of something that you should look for. Cool. Well, now that we got most of the boring kind of stuff around links out of the way, and you kind of have a little bit of a refresh in mind of what to look for there, we can dive into some of the fun stuff of how to scale some link building and sort of what we've done on our own end, what we've seen work, and how you can apply some of that. Are there any questions or anything that we want to jump into, Jimmy, before I dive in here?
There is one question which, well, maybe I'll just queue it up since we paused it anyway. I think it's a really interesting question. Alexandra asked, how important do you think site focus is? There are sites with high domain ratings with a zillion categories, and there are sites with low domain ratings with a very tight focus. How do you compare those? Or is it even an apples to apples comparison?
Yeah, it's definitely an interesting question. We really realistically see both working. We used to see a lot more niche sites work better, probably 5 or so years ago when exact match domains were more of a common thing. So, for example, if you were typing in anything like a specific keyword, people would actually spin up domains with that exact match keyword, create really in-depth content about it. You could rank pretty quickly there as you had like specific niche topical authority. What we're seeing now is sort of a mix of things where like a lot of high big DR brands are moving into sort of seemingly random spaces. So if you look at, I think the most interesting keyword I saw this example for was around, I believe it was like truck tires. If you search like best truck tires or something like that, you'll see that Forbes is actually ranking for that. I don't know if they're ranking #1, but they're somewhere within that top 5, I believe. So it gives you an idea of like just how broad stretching you can actually get if you have a really high authority site that's trusted, that has a brand, that has built a lot of links over time. So it's really like a case by case basis in that sense. And there's no like one good answer, unfortunately. I think both can work. It'll just depend about like what competitors are moving in. And that's sort of the only one downside of kind of a more niche specific site is that at some point competitors might decide that the money is worthwhile in that space and they might move in there, kind of like Forbes, right? They're moving into all these like crazy affiliate spaces. And so they might find that the money is worthwhile there to where they start to compete, and just based off of sheer authority and awareness alone, people are going to click on Forbes in the search results because it's a name that they know and recognize. So that's something to keep in mind too, is that your brand power really does matter in situations like this, and is definitely a factor at play.
Cool. That's really interesting. I just dropped the Forbes best truck tires link in the chat. It was #2 when I Googled it. Really good question, Alexandra, and very helpful answer. Thank you.
For sure. Yeah, that's definitely an interesting one. Cool. We'll dive into some of the studies. So this is just a quick screenshot of the study that we ran. So we started this a couple of years ago at this point. And essentially the baseline thesis here was let's survey a bunch of SEOs in the space and see what they think about kind of key link building questions that come up, how they let that inform their strategy, what kind of tools do they use, what do they find, is the most successful tactic. Just get an idea of what actual folks in the space are doing that's working, what's not working, what do they use. Thought it would be just really cool, interesting data that we really didn't see in the market just yet, and ones that, this is key information that's being talked about pretty frequently, but there's no real like major data set that we could reference for some of this. So that was our goal here, was just finding what's a topic that's really related to what we do and what we offer, and how do we make that interesting for others to talk about? How do we make it something easy for them to talk about, which we'll kind of dive into as well. And so some of the baseline results from that, around 300 plus unique domains to this single page here, coming from, Shopify, Neil Patel, Crazy Egg, Content Marketing Institute, Design Rush, SendPulse, Benchmark, lots of good quality sites coming in here. We still get thousands of visits per month from referral traffic. So this is not even an article that the intention here was not to rank this organically, this piece, because there's no great keyword for this that has a ton of measurable search volume or anything like that. The goal here is really getting lots of really good quality links on sites that might normally not link to us or mention us, and then again drive some good referral traffic coming in from those. So we get thousands of visits still per month, and this is a study that we first released, I think, around 2+ years ago or something. So we update it frequently, but still get a lot of good traffic from it. And then around 340,000 directly attributable revenue for us. So that was in the form of sales qualified leads who had came through either referral visits or they said, hey, we read this cool study, let's chat, engage further from there. And then obviously, like most marketers, our biggest pain point, proving loads of measurable brand awareness and SQLs that surely probably came from this, but are not able to directly tie with attribution data, all that fun stuff that I'm sure you're aware of. And then costs and resources. So I wanted to make it clear in this kind of discussion here that there is obviously sort of a misconception around like content marketing as a whole or SEO that like it's free because you're not spending money on like PPC ads and cost per click and things like that. But it's definitely not free, and doing industry reports that work and are successful at scale definitely do cost a fair bit of money, whether that's direct investment in like all of these different areas, or whether it's paying someone to do it, or whether it's doing it on your own time. All these things have a cost, right? And I want to make sure that that's clearly set and realistic from your perspective, so that when you do go to do this on your own, you do go to create a cool study, you do understand that there are costs here or a time sort of resource bank that you need to tap into. So that could be in the form of like industry research. It's obviously just time consuming, whether it's you doing it or you're paying someone to do the research. Question formulation is a really key aspect of like, why are we asking these questions? Is it going to generate some interesting answers that people want to discuss? So that's really one of the most key steps there, where you'll spend a good amount of time. You can also hire experts to like help you formulate survey questions. I know there's so many crazy niche business ideas out there, right? But then there's things like answer collection, data analysis, creating custom graphics from that data, creating that into a long form article, doing subject matter expert interviews, promoting that, continually updating it. So it's definitely not a cost-free thing to do in terms of earning links, but it is something that scales pretty heavily in the sense that your all-in range for this could be maybe 20K, and you could get hundreds of links that otherwise might cost you, if we're talking 500 to 1,000, maybe a link, depending on the quality there. That could be a significant cost just doing that outright. So there's a few things to weigh there on your own front, but wanted to give you guys, as much info as you can to see if any of that makes sense from your own budgeting perspectives. Any more questions or anything yet before we kind of dive into the campaign as a whole and how to run these steps on your own?
Good to go for now.
Awesome. Cool. So in terms of creating a survey and using this is one of my favorite methods in terms of just earning sheer amount of links at scale from really good sources that otherwise they're just not going to respond to your emails, right? We've all seen it in our own inboxes, the sheer amount of kind of link building spam, or whether it's LinkedIn, whatever it is, everyone's emailing you daily asking and saying, hey, I need a link on your page. It's like, cool, we all need those, right? But we need to think a little bit outside of the box and how we actually get those. And digital PR studies like this, where you're really targeting a specific niche, obviously the one that you're in, creating a topic that relates to some aspect of your business as a whole, and then creating actually some really unique content that doesn't exist out there yet, getting that promoted in front of the right audience, you can just earn so many more links at scale. And so it's one that I really think is worthwhile investing in. And then from this perspective, the starting point here should always be working backwards. So starting with the end in mind. So thinking, what sites do I want links from? Why do I want links from them? Like, for example, if I'm a software company, I don't really need links from Huffington Post or something like that, but I might need links from HubSpot or Search Engine Journal or Content Marketing Institute or any other given number of names in your given space, right? And so think a little bit from the backwards, the start or the end in mind. So what influencers and brands do I want to engage with it? What kind of core topics are relevant to my business that fit within those above parameters? And so I like to use a tool called SparkToro. Rand Fishkin started that from Moz. I think it's a really good tool for kind of socialized research. So looking and seeing like, what are your core topics? What are your core business areas? Who's talking about that stuff already can help you build a massive list of both websites and then also sort of influencers from different spaces or different social media channels that you can kind of tap into there and do for subject matter expert interviews. So SparkToro is a really great place to start and just kind of plug in a few of those broad topics there, whether it's a direct thing, a core aspect of your business, or something that's tangentially related. You just want to get a feel for who is talking about it, social, websites, podcasts, YouTube, all these kind of things you can do within SparkToro. Not a plug, I'm not sponsored by them. But it's just a good tool for this use case where you can really just get an idea of who's talking about what in your space. And then you can go to those individual sites and you can see what kind of content they published around this. You can get an idea that when you do go to pitch them this really unique data set and this information that doesn't exist out there, that they're actually going to take the time to read it because it's hyper relevant. And so that's a really key step is, again, work backwards, start with the end in mind, understand that this is my target audience, this is what they talk about, and now I'm going to create this piece of content that they haven't yet addressed. And that gives you a really good opportunity to get much more success, much more press. If you're starting with a topic before doing any of that and then kind of like trying to fit, the peg in the wrong hole, whatever that, phrase is, you're going to find that your acceptances from, a PR pitching standpoint are just going to be super low. You're not going to have customized it towards things that they actually want to learn from. So creating your topic and angle here, you can get a lot of good inspiration from what already exists in terms of how you structure a lot of this. There's a lot of good reports, trends, covered things around just broad marketing topics as a whole. You'll obviously want to do stuff that's a little more specific to your niche. So HubSpot, this makes sense for them, a state of marketing trends report. If you're a smaller brand, creating a state of marketing trends report is probably not going to work very well. Again, it's a super broad topic. It's been kind of beaten to the ground. HubSpot is your main competitor. Pretty impossible to compete with that if you're a smaller company. So think a little more niche, think a little more specific. For example, ours, we didn't go as broad as like SEO as a whole or SEO and marketing. We went super niche into the link building aspect of it. So kind of break down different aspects of things within that core topic or within your business that are interesting, other people are kind of chatting about already, and you can create some buzz around. There's also some cool things you can do, like tapping into relevant cultural trends if you can, though these ones, are a little bit less long lasting in the sense that they're not an evergreen topic. If you're tapping into cultural trends, they might get you some pretty quick wins, but they won't be ones that you would want to update on a yearly basis or anything and make those kind of a staple in your space. So try to pick ones where you can stick to that theme essentially every single year as like a core subject to your business. That way you're consistently updating it, it's consistently driving value year over year. So the formulate questions stage, this is where you've already identified a big list of audience targets, subject matter experts, websites to get links from, what your core topic is that they've covered before. So you can do that again by browsing some of the already existing content that they link to. So you can use tools like Ahrefs, SEMrush, whatever it is, Moz, all of these ones work just fine. You can dive into their link profile and see actually what they link to on a frequent basis. So you can understand from their perspective, right, what are they actually linking to? What's a good piece of content? What do they consider as valuable? And so that'll help you formulate a lot of your questions, right? So you can look through their content. What are key topics that they're covering over and over again? What are ones that they're not covering that you thought were interesting? Those are ones you want to avoid. So there's a lot of different things you can look at just from their own content, their own link profile, to get an idea of what they talk about the most, what they care about, and then really go deep and see, do they have any data already for this? If not, that's the perfect opportunity, right? If they're talking about a subject, they don't really have any great up-to-date data on that, that's your opportunity to go in and say, okay, now I'm going to formulate questions that apply directly to this topic as a whole. And so that's really the focus that we took here was looking and seeing what are people doing on the link building front for SEO? What are they talking about? A lot of people were talking about tools, but there was really no data on like who uses what tool, what did they succeed with the most, why that tool, kind of what are those results in a given space. So there's a lot of cool ideas you can break down from that. In terms of formulating your questions, the biggest key here is obviously you want to maximize responses to make sure that your study here is actually significant, right? Getting somewhere between 750 to 1,000 responses on your survey is ideal. Anything below a couple hundred is probably not going to be super notable. It's just going to limit the amount of folks that'll link back to you. And so one thing you want to do from a promotional standpoint is just make sure that you're putting ideal effort in here, right? Making sure that you're getting enough responses to where people actually take the study seriously. They understand that the results might actually have some statistical significance, all those kind of things. And so to maximize that, you ideally want to be in the range of like 10 or less questions, honestly. 20 is a real kind of top end maximum, to where unless you have some sort of good connection with the people that you're surveying from, or some sort of or some sort of reward at the end, like you're giving them $10 to complete the survey, that's where you're going to run into issues of just kind of incomplete data. So it's something to keep in mind that you should try to narrow down your focus to the most important questions there, and maintain sort of some of those qualifying questions in the early stages to help you filter out some of that data. So this step in the survey creation process is really key. Otherwise, you're going to kind of hit those roadblocks of just not getting enough folks to respond, or maybe it's incomplete. Maybe the responses aren't great because people get kind of burnt out after, we can only answer so many questions at one time. So, make sure you're starting with qualifying questions. So experience in that space, how many years, all these things are really key, and what actual like real publications are going to want to see. If you don't have some of that data, it's really hard for them to take the results seriously, or to make sure that you actually kind of did the real survey work here. If you don't have some of that, it's hard to understand where some of those questions are coming from, right? Like if it's the answer of someone being in this space for 10 years is going to be a lot different than someone who's new to it. So you want to make sure you have that qualifying data so you can kind of filter and understand. And then obviously making things multiple choice, range-based answers. These are definitely going to be the best ones to go for, that are going to involve the least amount of time or effort and help you collect more surveys as a whole.
We did get one question, Jeremy, that is like, I think it's related enough that I'd love to throw it at you now.
Yeah.
It's about competitor analysis. Deepanshu asks, for a quantitative comparison, should we segment competitor backlink profile by domain rating buckets to get a sense of how many referring domains we would need to be competitive?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I would definitely look at some of that. I'd really not. So there's a couple of metrics when you're looking at sort of an analysis like this. Typically, you're doing it via a tool like Ahrefs, SEMrush, et cetera. You'll typically see the main metric they often point you to is like total backlinks or DR as a whole. And then those metrics are okay, but like we kind of chatted about earlier, the total link stuff is not really an accurate metric whatsoever, right? Google doesn't put the same weight to each link that you get. And so if you're seeing just a total number, you might see, oh, wow, my competitor has 50,000 links and I have 1,000. Like, do I need to go and get 40,000 links? Absolutely not, right? You need to do a little bit of a deeper analysis and a filter there on like, what is the average DR of those links? What's the relevancy or contextualized nature of it? Like, are these profile page links, or are these actual in-content links where like someone's mentioning you, where it actually is going to count? Do these sites have traffic? So you want to do a little bit of a deeper analysis there, but for sure, I think it's a good way to benchmark and understand. It's not always a one-to-one correlation of like, my competitor has 50 links and I have 10 here, so I need 40 to be able to rank next to them. But there is definitely a little bit of a connection there between the two, where you will see for a good majority of search results that folks ranking above you, if content, everything else is the same, most of it's going to be a link play there of how do I close that gap between myself and a competitor? How do I identify where they're getting links from, and then make those sort of your main focus?
Awesome. Thank you.
For sure. And then this is the sort of data collection and analysis part of the super fun stuff that you love to do, sift through thousands of survey responses and data. So this part, you essentially, for data collection, you could do a few different things here. So if you're not sure, you're sitting there saying, how on earth do I get 500, 700, 1,000 responses in my niche? How do I survey that many people? The first answer is, if your niche is very, very specific, very, very niche, you obviously might not just be able to survey that many people, right? You can lower your standards there in that sense. If we're talking something that's a little more broad, you for sure want to have more survey results as a whole. So the few things you can do here that we sort of implemented were sponsor niche newsletters. So ones that have, ideally thousands of folks in a given space, sponsoring multiple of those and giving some sort of incentive there. So you're both sponsoring the newsletter proprietor, whoever is running that, and you're also offering some sort of incentive there. So like I mentioned, this is not a cost-free endeavor, right? For most of this, you're going to be paying to get, collected data at some level, right? So that could be sponsoring a niche newsletter, or having folks in that fill that out. It could be incentives. So it could be, hey, I'm going to send you a DM on LinkedIn. You're in this space. I'll give you $15 if you fill out the survey. Things like that, where you're actually going to get people incentivized to give you 10 minutes of their time. So these are some key areas that we've done. You can do things like Twitter ads. These work at some scale, though you kind of lack the filtering ability, right? Of like their backend for Twitter ads is not great from a filtering for age, occupation, how long they've been in it. It's really good for like just a one-off question. So it can be useful if you're doing it directly to your audience and your audience is very specific. That's when I can see, those being a good play as a whole. Or you can do mimicked audiences, like For example, if you wanted to do something in marketing, you could just mimic the audience of HubSpot and then put in some questions there. So definitely some unique workarounds there where you can spend a little less. And then obviously tap into your own network as much as you can. If you have even just a network of 20 people, share that to them and ask them to keep sharing that with their own, and that sort of compounds from there. It's something that we did quite a bit. And then Andy Crestodina, a good friend of mine, Orbit Media, you might have heard of him before. Pretty great content marketer as a whole. He does a similar kind of scenario there where he's tapping into his own network, providing incentives. He gave us a lot of positive feedback on how to run some of that. So big credit to Andy Crestodina at Orbit Media. Great guy, does a similar kind of survey style there with, I think is around like blogging statistics as a whole. So cool study if you want to go check that out. Another good source of inspiration on kind of how to execute some of that. Then from the data analysis standpoint, so this is where you can either do this or you can hire someone to do this too, where you just weed out a lot of the bad responses and you start to turn some of this data into kind of basic graphs. And then the end goal there is that you're making this a really nice design, right? A lot of what we're doing here is obviously, yes, the great survey data, the cool information that people can learn, but also shareability, right? We want to make this study as easy to link to and share to as possible. And so we'll show you what exactly that means in the next slide here. But you want to weed out any bad responses here that are like, maybe they answered one or two questions and nothing else, or maybe they just fell outside of the realm of like a good person within your niche. So they like didn't have enough experience to qualify. Whatever those parameters you set, you want to make sure you weed some of that out again, so that the data you're actually getting is super accurate. And then within Excel, you can just turn stuff into basic graphs here. So that work is really not super time intensive. You can turn a lot of that data that collects from a survey platform. You can export that right into Excel, Google Sheets, create some cool graphs in no time. And then the next step there is really turning this into more of a shareability thing. Any questions before I move into some of the rest here?
All good for right now.
Awesome. Cool. And then the next part here, after you've got a lot of your data, before you even start to write the piece that you're actually going to place this data within, the kind of long form article that you're going to share with people as like, here's the link to click, check it out, see all the data, that kind of thing. What you want to do is interview your subject matter experts. So these are folks that you identified in the early stages, the first step there, using SparkToro or manual research, whatever you want to do. Just compile that list of experts there. And then what you want to do is send them like a simple type form, essentially with a question or two, and then linking to that data set within like a Google Sheet or an Excel doc, so that they can actually see a lot of the survey data before it's published. So you're kind of getting them in on that like insider hook of like, hey, this is not published. We surveyed 500 people. Here's some like crazy cool data. We'd love for you to check it out, share a little bit. We'll promote you. We'll link back to you within the article. We'll share it on social. We'll give you lots of free promotion. They're going to respond, and people will kind of love providing their input on these, because like who wouldn't, right? It's cool to be included within that study. It's cool to be a part of it. It's cool to see the data before it actually goes live. So this is a really key step where you're going to get just way more responses from subject matter experts if you share that data beforehand. It's one that we found was just way more effective in running kind of multiple variants of the study, that if you share the data quickly before it goes live with them, you'll just see far better response rates. So you'll be shocked at like how many great experts in your field are actually going to respond there. Just hit them up on social media, LinkedIn, Twitter, maybe their inbox. Email's not super great for some of this, but if you can just casually kind of introduce it to them, you'll see pretty good response rates. And what you want to do there is really just ask them, for one sort of quick question or response on any data point that they see within that sheet. So like I mentioned, make sure you're attaching that sheet to them, sharing it with them beforehand, and then just get their opinion on sort of one specific aspect so that they have free reign. You're not sort of locking them in a box of like, hey, I need you to respond on this. You're just saying, brain dump me super quick what you think on this, and then we'll formulate that into a quote, get your approval, publish that, and then it'll be good to go. And then obviously the next step there is being their number one promoter once it goes live. Fulfill those promises that you gave of like, hey, if you do this favor for me, you provide a little bit of info here, I'm going to promote this, I'm going to link back to you, it's going to be worthwhile for you. And so that's something really key with the subject matter expert approach is reciprocity, is that it goes both ways too. So when you spend time promoting your subject matter experts and getting their expert opinion, they engage, they share, they link to you. They do all these things to help increase the visibility of the project that you just did. And so there's a really good mutual benefit there where you're promoting them, they're linking back, promoting you. It's kind of just human nature, right? Like we all want, anytime you've been linked maybe as like an expert in a piece, you want to reshare that, you want to send it to people, you want to like it, comment, engage. All those things stand true. It's the same thing when we're talking about these data sets and studies. And that really expands your network of people that can potentially link back to you, right? Again, a lot of this is for link play of how do I get really good quality sites, people that maybe I normally would not be able to reach to link back to me. And that's one of the key things here is making sure that you do get some good subject matter experts that can help you subtly promote it and get a lot of this into the eyes of audiences that you otherwise just would not be able to reach.
Quick question, Jeremy, on reciprocal links. Is it problematic for SEO? Or
Yeah,
is it?
it's a really good
Or is it kind
question.
of deemed?
Yeah, so it's there was an interesting study by Ahrefs, I believe. Maybe SEMrush did a similar one too, where I think they found that I can't remember the exact number, but I believe it was in the ballpark of like 70 to 80+% of sites in a given space are like reciprocally linking to each other. So it's not necessarily an issue whatsoever. It's more so if you're doing it like with a pattern at scale, with like the idea of sort of gaming the system, if that makes sense. Of like, if you're saying, okay, I've got these 100 sites, we're all just going to swap the same exact thing back and forth. That's for sure when you're running into like some gray area there. But there's just so many like reciprocal links on the internet of like, Forbes and entrepreneur.com probably pretty competitive with each other, but they still link to each other like a million times. And so it's really, not a major issue if you're not going into it with the intention of like, I'm going to reciprocally link 400 domains and like game the system. That's when you'll for sure run into issues.
Got it. That's helpful. I dropped that study in the chat.
Awesome.
And just a quick call to folks. We've got 10-ish minutes left. So if you have questions, drop them now and we'll queue them up as we finish up slides here.
Awesome. Yeah, I'll try to breeze through some of the rest so we can get to the Q&A stuff. So this is sort of the end game here is creating a long form content pillar piece. This will be your hub for driving links, press, mentions, engagements. This is where you send folks to, right? You don't want to necessarily force keywords. It's not the goal with this piece. While this does serve broader SEO goals, this actual study itself, you really don't need it to rank organically for anything in specific. If you have to force it, you're probably just giving up a little bit of leverage there in that sense where the article is just not really reading very well, or you have to fudge the topic a little bit to fit some sort of arbitrary keyword. So don't do that. If you can, that's great. If not, don't worry about it. Focus just on making a really interesting piece that has data people actually care about. And so that includes, like we mentioned, custom images, subject matter expert quotes to spark sharing and virality there. And then promotion channels. So you want to make sure, again, you got some cool custom images there and you can then promote it on things like Twitter, LinkedIn, again, tagging those interviewed SMEs. Reddit is a good place to post it. There's a bunch of different, subreddits around different topics there, whether it's SEO, startups, could be even more specific than that. And then Hacker News is a good one too if your study applies in more of the startup realm. Growth Hackers is another interesting one where it's kind of like a forum-based thing where people kind of read different stuff in there. Sponsoring any newsletters or newsletters of your own. A site pop-up that promotes the interesting data is a good play. We did that for quite a while and saw really strong results because, again, it's not like you're asking for anything. You're really just sharing, hey, here's some cool data we found. So people are much more likely to engage with that than they are something that's conversion-oriented. One good thing for promotion is, again, these custom images are really key because you get just so many image citations. Folks are going to use this in their content. They're going to cite you. If they don't, you can just do a quick reverse image search on Google, find all of those, email them, get a link placed for that. Huge opportunity here and definitely a key factor. And then cold pitching your heart out is the last one of you've got all the cool data now go hit up some journalists, bloggers, media, site owners, all that kind of stuff. And just be honest with them and share the data, right? Don't ask for anything in return. Don't say, can you link to this? Just say, hey, you wrote about this topic. Here's a cool data set we found after surveying X amount of people. Check it out. I can almost guarantee you that 75% of those folks are actually going to engage, link with it, and be excited to read it. So those are the kind of key promotional channels that I'd look for, and then you should start to see those links come through. Here's an example of one that we got pretty early on from Content Marketing Institute's cool reports or article that they released, linking to the report there from a really high authority domain that otherwise wasn't linking to us previously. I'll breeze through the last few link strategies at scale here. So Number one, really cool one is doing stats pages. So the key here is owning a lot of the stats, and that's what you're actually doing with the sort of study that you just created. So then you can create another statistics page here around some of that. Again, this one for us has 553 referring domains, so huge sites linking to it, a lot of informational stuff that people can reference. So definitely a cool one where you can kind of think outside the box. Podcasting is always a good one. It's a little less reliable for followed links in the sense that some sites might no follow them or it's hit or miss, but the double win potential is there in the sense that it's serving two purposes of main purpose is obviously get in front of a new audience, share some cool stuff, and then you get typically a link back from that as well. So highly recommend doing podcasting. And then the last one would be building relationships. This is really where the best links are going to come from. Relationships, they do take obviously a long time to build, but there's mutual benefits there. You can skip the traditional like cold outreach spam or whatever. I'm just sending a million emails, and you'll just get so many more opportunities for things like quotes to where you don't really have to use a crowded platform like Haro, help a reporter out, things like that. You can literally just go direct to source and say, cool, here's a quote that I'd love to add here, or they even come directly to you and say, we're writing this piece, would love a quote from you on this, because they know you, they understand what you've done, and the relationship there is mutually beneficial. So yeah, that's pretty much it for the presentation. So we can move into the QA.
Cool. Awesome. Let's do it. I can't help myself, but at least mention Help a B2B Writer. We acquired the site back in December.
Nice.
Part of the reason we were excited to bring that into the Superpath family was because we've built most of our best links through that platform. And because it's specific to content marketing and to B2B, yep, there's a lot less noise. There is some noise. I know we're working on that. We've just got some complaints this morning about that. So we're working on that, but yeah, like we've picked up links from Shopify, HubSpot, and Zapier, just to name a couple, with just a couple minutes worth of effort. So anyways, we have a couple really good questions. Jeremy, that was super, super informative, and people are asking some good stuff. We had 2 people ask about ABC link patterns. So I'll read this one from Kyle Kozinski. Says, when it comes to reciprocity and exchanging links, is it worth thinking about building multiple content domains up early to utilize a true ABC link pattern, which would prevent having to do one-to-one link exchanges?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. So it's sort of a gray area, right? In the sense that you're almost spinning up like your own sort of private PBN, so a private blogging network, which is definitely not kosher, so to speak, in the eyes of Google. So something you'd want to be sort of concerned about there is having a lot of those properties like linked to your own like logins, essentially. So if you have like all those in your search console, like let's say you have 10 sites in your search console or your Google Analytics, all tied to one account owned under all these domains, pretty easy for them to understand like, okay, this person has like a massive list of these sites and he's just linking in between, or she's just linking in between all these different ones. So that's something I'd be concerned about for sure at a bigger scale. On a smaller scale, I don't think there's anything necessarily wrong with it. I think it just depends on the way that it's done. If it's with the intent of like garnering a huge amount of links and kind of gaming the system in that sense, it's stuff that I generally would stay away from long term. I think you could fly under the radar if done well, but again, it's sort of on that like borderline between it's okay or it's like against guidelines depending on how you do it. So I would just kind of tread carefully, but hopefully that answered the question.
Yeah, that's helpful. Ronnie asked a question that I feel like really cuts to the heart of the conversation about SEO. He says, new to SEO, could this strategy be enough to rank a site that is just starting out? To me, that's like the question, because like, you reference a site like NerdWallet, like they've built up such authority that now their sort of quality barrier in theory could be lower. I'm not saying their content's not good, but they face a very different challenge than a relatively new site who's trying to just start building momentum.
Yeah, absolutely. It's definitely a really good strategy for new sites. The only downside is that obviously it does require a budget. So if you're kind of trying to bootstrap things and you want to do the survey, it's possible to do it on your own. But there are probably some things where you're going to have to pay at a certain point of like whether that's people's time or responses, things like that. So it's not like a budget-free option, but it's definitely a good one in terms of like actually getting your site to rank if it's new in a given niche, just based on the sheer amount of traction and brand awareness links that you can gain from it, in comparison to trying to, if you're a brand new site, you have a few blog posts up and you go to do outreach for links, no one is going to respond to you because it's really just not in their best interest to link to you. If you're a newer site, there's usually a little more hesitancy to link to you just because you're not authoritative in that space. No one really trusts your content yet. Giving you a link from a good site is basically a sign that they trust you, right? And so you don't really have any of that trust built up yet. So it's actually one of my favorite ways if you're a smaller site or you're trying to break into a space, is to come out with something that's really unique, content that's not necessarily like, it's kind of counterintuitive, but the content is not necessarily driven towards a given keyword or actually ranking organically, right? This content piece is kind of generalized content marketing with that main benefit of actually driving SEO, even though that specific page is not ranking. And so that's how I would think a little bit about this, is that how can I make this a really cool branded thing that I do year over year, to where those links are essentially just a proxy now that come through. And you will see that's probably your best bet if you're a really brand new site, beyond just kind of hammering, outreach as a whole, which might work, but it's just the conversion rate there is going to be really low.
Got it. That's helpful. Just anecdotally, we've run a salary report for the last couple of years. The huge majority of the backlinks that we build go to that salary report. And for all the reasons you described, it's like unique data, you can get people to comment on it, et cetera. Cool. We're just about out of time. Thank you so much, folks, for coming. Jeremy, thank you so much. That was awesome. Where can we point people? Obviously, we'll point them to the Usurp site. Can we point them to your LinkedIn, Twitter, personal site, or anywhere else?
Yeah, absolutely. You can check me out on Twitter. It's just J Moser with 2 R's at the end, or you can search my name. I should show up there. And then LinkedIn, same thing. Feel free to reach out if you have any questions or if I can help with anything.
Amazing. Thank you so much for your time. We will send the recording out. If not today, it'll be first thing tomorrow, so folks can rewatch. And yeah, we'll have more webinars coming up, so keep an ear out for announcements about those. Go check out Usurp. And Jeremy, thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Take care, everybody.
See ya.